wind howled like a wounded animal, drowning out the sputtering of my dying engine. I squinted through the windshield, barely able to see past the relentless curtain of white. This wasn't how I'd planned to spend my evening. I'd left work later than usual, eager to get home and start my weekend. The storm had been in the forecast, but I figured I'd beat it home. I was wrong. So very wrong. The first flakes started falling as I turned onto the mountain road that led to my small town. By the time I realized how bad it was getting, it was too late to turn back. The snow came down harder and faster, quickly blanketing the winding road. My little sedan wasn't built for this. I white-knuckled the steering wheel, leaning forward as if it would help me see better. The wind buffeted my car and I felt the tires losing traction. My heart raced as I fought to keep control. That's when I saw it. A flash of movement at the edge of my headlights. A deer? A person? Whatever it was, it startled me. I jerked the wheel and felt the car start to slide. Everything happened in slow motion. The world spun around me as the car slid off the road. There was a sickening crunch as the front end hit something solid. Then silence, save for the howling wind. I sat there stunned, for what felt like hours but was probably only a minute or two. My hands shook as I unbuckled my seatbelt. I was alive. Somehow, I was alive. The reality of my situation slowly sank in. I was off the road in a ditch or embankment of some kind. My car was dead, and the storm was only getting worse. I fumbled for my phone, praying I had signal. 1 bar. It wasn't much, but it was something. I dialed 911 with trembling fingers. 911, what's your emergency? The dispatcher's voice was like a lifeline. I explained my situation as calmly as I could, which wasn't very calm at all. Ma'am, can you tell me your location? I looked around helplessly. I'm not sure. I'm on Mountain Road, heading towards Pinecrest. Maybe halfway there? There's a big curve, and I think I went off on the outside of it. Okay, stay calm. We're dispatching help, but the storm is making things difficult. It might take some time. Are you injured? I did a quick self-assessment. No, I don't think so. Just shaken up. Good. Stay in your vehicle. It's the safest place for you right now. Do you have a full tank of gas? My heart sank. No, it was almost on empty. I was going to fill up when I got to town. Okay, don't run the engine continuously. Turn it on periodically to warm up the car, but make sure the exhaust pipe isn't blocked by snow. Do you have any emergency supplies? Blankets? Water? I closed my eyes, feeling like an idiot. No, nothing. The dispatcher's voice remained calm, but I could hear the concern. All right, help is on the way. Try to stay warm and... The line went dead. I stared at my phone in disbelief. The signal was gone. I tried calling back, but nothing went through. Panic started to set in. I was alone, in a broken-down car in the middle of a blizzard with a dying phone and no supplies. The wind rocked my car and snow piled up around it at an alarming rate. I turned the key in the ignition, praying for a miracle. The engine coughed and sputtered but wouldn't turn over. Come on, I muttered, trying again. Nothing. I slumped back in my seat, fighting back tears. This couldn't be happening. I thought about my warm apartment, my cat who would be wondering where I was. Would anyone even notice I was missing before morning? The temperature in the car was dropping rapidly. I rubbed my hands together, blew on them, tried to keep moving, but the cold was relentless. It seeped into my bones, making me sluggish. I'm not sure how long I sat there shivering and scared. Time seemed to lose all meaning. The world outside my car had vanished, replaced by a swirling white void. That's when I saw it again. Movement in the snow. My heart leapt. Had help arrived? I pressed my face to the window, squinting to see through the frost that was forming. There it was again, a dark shape moving through the white. Hey! I shouted, though I knew they couldn't hear me. I honked the horn, but the battery was so weak it only produced a pathetic squeak. The shape got closer. It was person-sized, but something about the movement was off. It didn't move like someone trudging through deep snow. It was too fluid, too easy. As it got closer, I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the cold. Something was wrong. Very wrong. I locked the doors, though I'm not sure why. Some animal instinct took over, screaming at me that whatever was out there wasn't here to help. The shape stopped about 10 feet from my car. I could see it clearly now, a dark silhouette against the snow. It was roughly human-shaped, but too tall, too thin, and it was utterly still. I held my breath, afraid to move, afraid to make a sound. Long seconds ticked by. Why didn't it do something? Say something? Then slowly it began to move again, not towards me, but in a circle around my car. I turned in my seat, trying to keep it in view. When it reached the back of the car, I lost sight of it. My heart pounded so hard I thought it might burst. Where did it go? What was it doing? A scraping sound made me jump. It was coming from the roof. Slow, deliberate scrapes like claws on metal. "Go away!" I shouted, my voice cracking with fear. "Leave me alone!" The scraping stopped. For a moment there was only the sound of the wind and my ragged breathing. Then a face appeared at my window. I screamed. I couldn't help it. It was a face, but not a human face. The features were all wrong, twisted and elongated. And the eyes were black pits that seemed to swallow all light. I scrambled across the center console, trying to get as far away as possible. The thing pressed its face against the glass, its breath fogging the window. I fumbled for my phone with shaking hands. It was dead. Of course it was dead. I was alone with this thing. It raised a hand, too long, too many joints, and pressed it against the window. The glass frosted over instantly, spreading out from its touch like ice crystals. I was hyperventilating now, my vision starting to gray at the edges. This couldn't be real. I had to be hallucinating from the cold. That was it. I was freezing to death and my mind was playing tricks on me. The thing tilted its head, an eerily human gesture that only made it more terrifying. Its mouth opened, far too wide, revealing rows of needle-like teeth. I closed my eyes. This wasn't real. It couldn't be real. A sharp crack made me jump. I opened my eyes to see a spider web of cracks spreading across the window. The thing was pressing harder, the glass beginning to give way under its inhuman strength. This was it. I was going to die here, torn apart by some impossible creature in the middle of a snowstorm. I thought of my family, my friends. Would they ever know what happened to me? The window shattered. I screamed again as glass and snow flew into the car. Cold wind whipped around me, stealing my breath. I covered my face with my arms, waiting for the attack, but it never came. Slowly, I lowered my arms. The thing was gone. The swirling snow outside was empty. I sat there shaking for I don't know how long. Had it been real? Had any of it been real? A new sound cut through the howling wind. An engine. Flashing lights. I looked up to see a snowplow pushing its way down the road, followed by a police cruiser. They'd found me. I was saved. As the vehicles pulled up next to my car, I started sobbing with relief. The nightmare was over. The police officer had to practically pry me out of the car. I was babbling, trying to explain about the creature, the face at the window. He nodded sympathetically, but I could see in his eyes that he didn't believe me. "You've been through quite an ordeal," he said gently as he helped me into the warm cruiser. "Hypothermia can cause hallucinations. Let's get you to the hospital to get checked out." I wanted to argue, to make him understand that it had been real, but as the car pulled away, the warmth seeping into my frozen limbs, I started to doubt myself. Had it been real? Or was my mind playing tricks on me? As we drove away, I looked back at my abandoned car. For a moment, I thought I saw a tall, thin shadow standing beside it. I blinked, and it was gone. I turned back around, huddling into the blanket the officer had given me. Maybe it had been a hallucination. Maybe I had imagined the whole thing. But as we drove down the mountain, leaving the storm behind, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was out there in the snow. Something that would be waiting for the next unlucky traveler to break down on that lonely mountain road. I never drove that road again. The world went white, then black. In an instant, I was buried alive. I'd been skiing these slopes for years. I knew the risks, but like most seasoned backcountry skiers, I'd grown complacent. The powder was perfect that day, untouched and gleaming in the morning sun. The avalanche risk was moderate, but we'd seen worse. We thought we knew what we were doing. We were wrong. I remember the sound first. A low rumble that quickly became a roar. I turned to see a wall of white racing towards me. There was no time to think, no time to react. One moment I was standing, the next I was tumbling, my world reduced to a chaos of snow and darkness. They say your life flashes before your eyes when you're about to die. For me, it was more like a highlight reel of every stupid decision that led me to this moment, ignoring the warning signs, pushing just a little further into untouched territory, thinking I was invincible. The avalanche tossed me like a rag doll. I lost all sense of direction, of up and down. My lungs burned as snow forced its way into my mouth and nose. This was it. This was how I was going to die. Then suddenly it stopped. The silence was deafening after the roar of the avalanche. I couldn't see anything, couldn't move. Panic set in as I realized I was buried. How deep? Which way was up? I forced myself to calm down, to think. Training kicked in. First things first, create an air pocket. I brought my hands up to my face, cupping them around my mouth and nose. It wasn't much, but it would buy me some time. Next, I tried to move. My left arm was pinned, but I could wiggle my right hand a bit. My legs were immobilized. I was packed in tight. "Don't panic," I whispered to myself, my voice muffled in the snow. "They'll find you. Just stay calm." I fumbled for the cord on my jacket, pulling out the avalanche beacon. This was my lifeline. As long as it was transmitting, the rescue team would be able to find me. I pressed the button, waiting for the reassuring beep that would tell me it was working. Nothing. I pressed it again, harder this time. Still nothing. "No, no, no," I muttered, my heart racing. This couldn't be happening. I'd checked the batteries just yesterday. It had to work. But it didn't. My beacon, the one thing that could lead rescuers to me, was dead. The reality of my situation hit me like a physical blow. I was buried who knows how deep in snow, with no way to signal for help. My friends, if they'd survived, would be searching for me. But without a working beacon, how would they ever find me? I don't know how long I lay there, trying not to give in to despair. Time lost all meaning in my dark, cold prison. I tried to stay still, to conserve oxygen, but it was hard. Every instinct screamed at me to fight, to dig, to do something. But I knew that struggling would only pack the snow around me tighter, making it harder to breathe. So I lay there, trying to slow my breathing, trying to stay calm. I thought about my family, my parents who had always worried about my extreme hobbies, my sister, who I was supposed to meet for dinner next week. Would I ever see them again? I thought about my friends, the ones who had been with me on the mountain. Had they been caught in the slide too? Were they searching for me now? Or were they... No, I couldn't think about that. As time passed, the cold began to seep into my bones. My body heat was slowly melting the snow around me, but that only made things worse. My clothes, designed to wick away sweat, were now soaked through. Hypothermia was becoming a real concern. I tried to wiggle my toes, my fingers, anything to keep blood flowing. But movement was almost impossible. I was entombed in ice. That's when I heard it. A sound. Faint, muffled, but definitely there. I held my breath, straining to listen. There it was again. Voices? Hope surged through me. They were looking for me. They had to be close if I could hear them. "Here," I tried to shout, but it came out as barely more than a whisper. My throat was raw from breathing in snow, and my chest felt compressed by the weight above me. "I'm here!" I listened again, desperate for any sign that they'd heard me. The voices seemed to be moving. Were they getting closer or moving away? "Help!" I called again, putting every ounce of strength I had left into it. "I'm down here." Silence. Had I imagined it? Was my oxygen-deprived brain playing tricks on me? No, there it was again. Definitely voices, but they sounded farther away now. "No," I whispered. "No, please. I'm here. Come back." Tears froze on my cheeks as I realized what was happening. They were searching for me, but without my beacon, they had no way to pinpoint my location. They were going to miss me. I don't know how long I lay there, listening to the voices fade in and out. It could have been minutes or hours. Time had no meaning anymore. My thoughts began to wander. I felt strangely peaceful, despite the situation. Was this what dying felt like? I thought about the life I'd lived. It had been a good one, full of adventure and love. If this was how it ended, well, there were worse ways to go. But a small, stubborn part of me refused to give up. I thought of my family again, of how devastated they would be. I couldn't do that to them. I had to keep fighting. I started talking to myself, to the snow, to anyone who might be listening. Come on, guys. I'm right here. Just a little to the left. You're so close. My voice was weak, barely audible even to my own ears. But it was something. It was me, still alive, still fighting. The voices came and went. Sometimes they seemed tantalizingly close, other times so far away I could barely hear them. I oscillated between hope and despair with each passing moment. As time wore on, it became harder to stay awake. The cold had seeped into every part of me. I couldn't feel my fingers or toes anymore. My thoughts were becoming sluggish. I knew this was dangerous. Sleep meant death in a situation like this. But it was so tempting. Just to close my eyes for a moment. A new sound jolted me awake. It was different from the voices, a scraping, crunching sound. It took my foggy brain a moment to process what I was hearing. Shovels. They were digging. Here! I tried to shout, but it came out as barely a croak. I'm here! The digging sound stopped. Had they heard me? Then, miracle of miracles, a voice, close, so close. Hello? Is someone there? I've never heard anything so beautiful in my life. Yes, I managed to rasp out. Yes, I'm here. The digging resumed with renewed vigor. I could hear excited voices, though I couldn't make out the words. Keep talking, someone shouted. We're coming for you, I babbled. I have no idea what I said. Names, prayers, random thoughts, anything to keep making noise, to guide them to me. The sounds got closer and closer. I could hear the crunch of snow right above me. Suddenly there was light, blinding, beautiful light. A face appeared in the hole they dug, a face streaked with tears and snow grinning from ear to ear. We've got you, the rescuer said. You're going to be okay. Hands reached down, gently but firmly grasping me. As they pulled me from my icy tomb, I burst into tears. I was alive. Against all odds, I was alive. The next few hours passed in a blur. I was wrapped in blankets, checked over by medics, and whisked off to the hospital. I learned later that I'd been buried for over 6 hours. By all rights, I should have been dead. My friends had survived the avalanche and immediately started searching for me. When they couldn't pick up my beacon signal, they feared the worst. But they didn't give up. They searched grid by grid, refusing to leave until they found me. It was pure luck that they happened to be close enough for me to hear them. Pure luck that they decided to probe that particular spot of snow. Pure luck that I was still alive when they found me. As I lay in the hospital bed, surrounded by my relieved family and friends, I made a promise to myself. I would never take a risk like that again. I would respect the mountain, respect nature, and I would never, ever forget to check my beacon batteries. I walked away from that mountain with a new perspective on life and a deep appreciation for the fragility of existence. Every day since then has been a gift, a bonus round I never expected to have. And every winter, when the snow begins to fall, I remember those dark hours beneath the snow. I remember the fear, the cold, the despair, but mostly, I remember the moment when light broke through the darkness, and I got a second chance at life. The ice groaned beneath our feet, a sound that sent chills down my spine far colder than the biting wind. We were halfway across the lake when I realized we'd made a terrible mistake. It had seemed like such a good idea at the time. Mark and I had been hiking through the mountains, enjoying the crisp winter air and the pristine snow-covered landscape. We'd done this trek a dozen times before, but never in winter. The storm wasn't supposed to hit until tomorrow, according to the forecast. The weatherman, as usual, was wrong. We first noticed the dark clouds rolling in as we reached the shore of Lake Crystalline. In summer, we'd swim in these waters or paddle across in kayaks. Now it was a vast expanse of ice, glittering dully under the increasingly ominous sky. We should turn back, I said, eyeing the clouds warily. Mark shook his head. No way, Alex. Look, the lake's frozen solid. If we cross here, we'll cut at least 2 hours off our trip. We'll be back at the car before the storm hits. I hesitated. It was tempting. My feet were already aching from our long hike, and the thought of taking a shortcut was appealing. Still, something didn't feel right. I don't know, man. Crossing frozen lakes is dangerous. We don't know how thick the ice is. Mark was already stepping onto the ice. It's fine. Look, it's holding my weight no problem. Come on, don't be a chicken. I sighed, knowing I'd lost the argument. Mark had always been the more adventurous one, always pushing boundaries. Usually, I was grateful for it. His daring had led us to some amazing experiences. But right now, as I gingerly followed him onto the ice, I wished he was a little more cautious. The first few minutes were nerve-wracking but uneventful. The ice seemed solid enough, though the occasional creak or groan made my heart race. We made good time, our boots crunching on the snow-dusted surface. We were about halfway across when the wind picked up dramatically. Snow began to fall, softly at first, then with increasing intensity. Within minutes, visibility dropped sharply. "Mark," I called out, having to raise my voice over the howling wind. "We need to go back." He turned, his face barely visible through the swirling snow. "We're more than halfway. It doesn't make sense to turn back now. Come on, we can make it." I wanted to argue, but I knew he was right. Going back would take just as long as going forward, and at least going forward would get us closer to the car. Reluctantly, I pressed on. That's when I heard it. A sharp crack, like a gunshot, cutting through the wind's howl. We both froze. "What was that?" I asked, my voice shaking. Mark's eyes were wide. "I don't know. But let's keep moving. Carefully." We inched forward, every step cautious and measured. The wind battered us from all sides, and the snow was falling so thickly now that I could barely see Mark, just a few feet ahead of me. Another crack, louder this time. I felt the ice shift beneath my feet. "Mark!" I shouted. "The ice is breaking. Don't panic," he yelled back. "We're almost there. Just keep moving." But I couldn't. Fear had me rooted to the spot. The ice groaned again, and I swear I could feel it bowing slightly under my weight. "Alex, you have to move." Mark's voice seemed to come from far away, though I knew he was close. "If you stand still, you'll put too much pressure on one spot." I knew he was right, but my body wouldn't cooperate. My legs felt like lead, my feet frozen to the ice. Panic clawed at my throat. Suddenly Mark was there, grabbing my arm. "Come on, buddy. We're doing this together. One step at a time." His presence snapped me out of my panic. Together we began to move again, step by agonizing step. The ice continued to creak and groan beneath us, each sound sending a jolt of terror through me. The wind howled louder, driving snow and ice into our faces. I couldn't see the shore. I couldn't see anything but white. We could have been walking in circles for all I knew. "How much further?" I shouted over the wind. "I don't know," Mark called back. "I can't see a damn thing." We pressed on, the ice symphony beneath our feet growing more ominous with each step. I tried to take comfort in the fact that we hadn't fallen through yet, but the rational part of my brain knew that could change in an instant. Time lost all meaning. We could have been walking for minutes or hours. The world had narrowed to the small circle of visibility around us, the howling wind, and the treacherous ice beneath our feet. Then, without warning, Mark disappeared. One moment he was in front of me, the next he was gone, swallowed by a gaping black hole in the ice. I heard his startled yell, cut short as he hit the freezing water. "Mark, oh!" I screamed, dropping to my knees at the edge of the hole. The ice cracked ominously under me, but I didn't care. All I could think about was my friend, somewhere in that dark water. For a heart-stopping moment, there was nothing. Then Mark's head broke the surface, gasping and spluttering. "Alex!" he choked out. "Help!" I reached out, trying to grab him, but he was just out of reach. The ice around the hole was breaking up, chunks falling into the water as Mark thrashed. "Hold on!" I shouted, frantically looking around for something, anything I could use to reach him, but there was nothing but ice and snow. Mark's movements were getting weaker. The cold was sapping his strength fast. I knew hypothermia would set in within minutes in water this cold. There was only one thing to do. Taking a deep breath, I began to slide forward on my belly, trying to distribute my weight as much as possible. The ice protested, cracking and splitting around me. I ignored it, focused solely on reaching Mark. His eyes were wide with fear, his lips already turning blue. "Just a little more," I grunted, stretching out as far as I could. My fingers brushed his coat, then caught hold. "Got you!" With a strength born of desperation, I began to pull. Mark was dead weight, his waterlogged clothes making him impossibly heavy. The ice continued to crack around us, and I knew we were both seconds away from going under. Somehow, inch by excruciating inch, I managed to pull Mark from the water. We lay there on the ice, gasping and shaking, too exhausted to move. "We have to keep moving," I finally managed to say through chattering teeth. "You'll freeze if we don't." Mark nodded weakly. His clothes were already stiffening with ice. Together we staggered to our feet. We moved slowly, painfully aware of how fragile the ice was. Every step could be our last. Mark leaned heavily on me, his movements growing more sluggish by the minute. Just when I thought we couldn't go on, when the cold and exhaustion were about to overcome us, I saw it. A dark shape looming out of the whiteness. The shore. "We're almost there," I said, giving Mark a shake. He mumbled something incoherent in response. Those last few yards were the hardest of my life. The wind seemed determined to push us back, the ice to swallow us whole. But finally, miraculously, my foot crunched on something that wasn't ice. Snow-covered rocks. We'd made it. We collapsed on the shore, beyond exhausted. But we couldn't stop. Not yet. Mark's clothes were frozen solid, and he was barely conscious. Somehow I found the strength to get us both up. We stumbled through the woods, the trees providing some shelter from the relentless wind. I had no idea if we were going the right way, but any direction had to be better than staying put. I don't know how long we walked. Time had ceased to have any meaning. But suddenly, there it was. Our car. A dark shape in the swirling white. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely get the key in the lock. But then we were inside, and I was cranking the heat as high as it would go. We sat there, shivering violently as warmth slowly seeped back into our bodies. Neither of us spoke. We didn't need to. We both knew how close we'd come to dying out there. Eventually, Mark turned to me, his face pale but his eyes clear. "Alex," he said softly, "you saved my life." I shook my head. "We saved each other. Let's go home." As I carefully navigated the snowy roads back to town, I couldn't stop thinking about how different things could have turned out. One wrong step, one moment of hesitation, and we'd both be at the bottom of that lake. We'd tempted fate and survived, but the experience left an indelible mark on both of us. Never again would we take nature's power for granted. Never again would we risk our lives for a shortcut. The lake had taught us a valuable lesson, one etched in ice and fear, and as the warmth finally returned to my bones, I silently vowed to never forget it. The last ember in the fireplace flickered and died, plunging us into darkness. In that moment, I realized we were in real trouble. It had started as a typical winter evening. My wife Sarah, our two kids Emma and Liam, and I were snuggled up in the living room, watching movies and enjoying the warmth of our fireplace. Outside, the wind howled and snow pelted against the windows. The blizzard had been raging for hours, but we felt safe and cozy in our little bubble of warmth. Then the lights went out. At first, we laughed it off. Power outages weren't uncommon during storms like this. I fumbled around for some candles while Sarah corralled the kids who were alternating between excitement and fear at this unexpected adventure. "It's okay," I reassured everyone, striking a match and lighting the first candle. "The power company will have it back on in no time." How wrong I was. As the hours ticked by, the temperature in the house began to drop. We huddled closer together, piling on blankets and stoking the fire. But without the central heating, the cold was relentless. By midnight, we could see our breath in the candlelight. Emma and Liam had fallen into a fitful sleep, wrapped up like burritos in every blanket we could find. Sarah and I exchanged worried glances over their heads. "Maybe we should try to leave," Sarah whispered, her voice tight with concern. I shook my head. "The roads will be impassable. We're safer here." But as I said it, I wasn't so sure. The wind outside had reached a fever pitch, howling like a wild animal. Occasionally, we'd hear a sharp crack, branches breaking under the weight of snow and ice. I tried calling the power company again, but the cell signal was gone. We were completely cut off. As the night wore on, sleep became impossible. The cold had seeped into my bones, and every creak and groan of the house settling made me jump. Sarah and I took turns checking on the kids, making sure they were warm enough. It was during one of these checks that I heard it, a sound from upstairs, distinct from the storm outside. A thump, followed by scratching. I froze, straining my ears. There it was again. "Sarah," I whispered, not wanting to wake the kids. "Did you hear that?" She nodded, her eyes wide in the dim candlelight. "What is it?" "Probably just a branch hitting the roof," I said, trying to sound more confident than I felt. "I'll go check it out." Grabbing a flashlight, thankfully we had stocked up on batteries, I made my way to the stairs. Each step creaked under my weight, the sound unnaturally loud in the silent house. As I reached the top of the stairs, I heard it again, clearer this time. It was definitely coming from the attic. My heart pounded as I approached the attic door. The rational part of my brain said it was probably just an animal, a raccoon or squirrel that had sought shelter from the storm. But in the dark, with the wind howling outside, my imagination ran wild. I put my hand on the doorknob, took a deep breath, and opened it. The beam of my flashlight cut through the darkness, illuminating dust motes and cobwebs. At first, I saw nothing out of the ordinary, just the usual clutter of boxes and old furniture. Then something moved. I swung the flashlight towards the movement, my heart in my throat. For a split second, I thought I saw a figure, hunched and dark, dart behind a stack of boxes. But when I looked again, there was nothing there. "Hello?" I called out, my voice shaky. "Is someone there?" No response, just the endless howling of the wind. I stepped further into the attic, sweeping the flashlight back and forth. The shadows seemed to move and shift in the flickering light. Every object took on a sinister aspect. Was that coat stand always that tall? Did that mirror always reflect back such darkness? Another sound, a scuttling, like something moving fast across the floor. I whirled around but saw nothing. "Okay," I muttered to myself. "Time to go back downstairs." As I turned to leave, my flashlight beam caught something that made my blood run cold. Footprints in the dust, and they weren't mine. I practically flew down the stairs, slamming the attic door behind me. Sarah was waiting at the bottom, her face pale with worry. "What is it?" she asked. "What did you see?" I opened my mouth to tell her, then closed it again. How could I explain without sounding crazy? "It's nothing," I said finally. "Probably just the wind moving things around up there." She didn't look convinced, but nodded. "The kids are getting really cold," she said. "I'm worried about them." I pushed the attic incident to the back of my mind, focusing on the more immediate problem. We needed to find a way to stay warm. We spent the next hour building a makeshift tent in the living room, using sheets and furniture to create a small enclosed space where we could all huddle together. We moved the kids inside, their little faces pinched with cold even in sleep. As Sarah and I settled in beside them, I found myself straining to hear any sound from upstairs, but there was nothing except the storm. The next few hours were a battle against the cold and exhaustion. We took turns sleeping, always making sure someone was awake to watch over the kids and tend to the dying fire. It was during one of my watches, as the first gray light of dawn was seeping through the windows, that I heard it again, a thump from upstairs, followed by the unmistakable sound of footsteps. Sarah stirred beside me. "What was that?" she mumbled, still half asleep. Before I could answer, another sound cut through the howling wind, a long, low creak like someone slowly opening a door. We both sat up, fully awake now. The footsteps were clearer now, moving across the ceiling above us. "Stay with the kids," I whispered to Sarah, grabbing the poker from the fireplace. It wasn't much of a weapon, but it was better than nothing. Heart pounding, I crept out of our makeshift tent and towards the stairs. The footsteps had stopped, but I could feel a presence, a weight in the air that told me we weren't alone. I reached the bottom of the stairs and looked up, and there, at the top, was a figure. In the dim light, I couldn't make out details. It was tall, unnaturally so, and thin. It stood perfectly still, facing me. "Who are you?" I called out, my voice cracking. "What do you want?" The figure didn't respond. It just stood there, watching. Then, slowly, it began to descend the stairs. I raised the poker, ready to defend my family. But with each step the figure took, my fear began to transform into confusion. As it got closer, I realized why the proportions had seemed so odd. It wasn't one person, but two, a man carrying a child. "Help!" the man croaked as he reached the bottom of the stairs. "Please." In the growing light, I could see they were both covered in snow, their clothes frozen stiff. The man's face was pale, his lips blue with cold. "Sarah," I called out, lowering the poker. "Bring blankets." The next hour was a flurry of activity. We learned that the man, David, and his daughter, Mia, had been driving when their car slid off the road. They'd seen our house and broken in through the attic window, desperate for shelter. "I'm sorry," David kept saying as we wrapped them in blankets. "We didn't mean to frighten you. We called out, but with the storm—" I nodded, understanding now why we'd heard noises but no responses. The wind had drowned out their voices, just as it had prevented them from hearing us. As the day wore on, the storm finally began to abate. The power flickered back to life mid-afternoon, bringing with it blessed heat and light. We spent the day recovering, sharing stories and hot drinks. Emma and Liam were thrilled to have a new playmate in Mia, and soon the house was filled with the sound of children's laughter, a stark contrast to the terrifying silence of the night before. As I watched David hugging his daughter, I thought about how close they had come to freezing to death in their car, and how our fear and imagination had almost prevented us from helping them. The incident in the attic, the footsteps, the strange figure on the stairs, all of it had a perfectly rational explanation, but in the dark, cold night, our minds had twisted it into something sinister. That night taught me a lot about the power of nature, the strength of family, and the importance of keeping a cool head in a crisis. But most of all, it taught me about compassion, how opening our door to strangers might just save a life, including our own. As the day drew to a close and David prepared to leave with Mia, now that the roads were clear, he turned to me with tears in his eyes. "Thank you," he said simply. "We wouldn't have survived without you." I shook his hand, feeling a lump in my throat. "We're just glad you're okay," I replied. "And thank you too. You reminded us of what's really important." As I watched their car drive away, I hugged Sarah and the kids close. The house was warm again, but I realized the real warmth came from within, from the love of family and the kindness of strangers. And no storm, no matter how fierce, could ever take that away. The moment the lights went out, I knew this wasn't going to be an ordinary blackout. The silence that followed was too complete, too absolute. It was as if our little town had been swallowed whole by the storm. I'm Jim Hawkins, editor of the Millbrook Gazette, an unofficial chronicler of our town's history. Millbrook has weathered its fair share of storms over the years, but nothing could have prepared us for what was coming. The blizzard had been raging for hours, wind howling like a banshee, and snow piling up faster than I'd ever seen. Most folks were hunkered down at home, but I was at the newspaper office, determined to get the next day's edition ready. Old habits die hard, I suppose. When the power cut out, I wasn't too worried at first. I fired up the backup generator, casting the office in a dim, flickering light. But as I tried to call the power company, I realized my cell phone had no signal. The landline was dead too. Frowning, I walked to the window, peering out into the whiteout conditions. That's when I saw it, a dark figure moving through the snow. At first I thought it was someone seeking shelter, but its movements were off, too fluid for someone trudging through knee-deep snow. I blinked and it was gone. Must be my eyes playing tricks on me, I thought. The storm was messing with my head. Shaking it off, I went back to work. But I couldn't shake the uneasy feeling that had settled over me. Something wasn't right. An hour later, there was a pounding at the door. I opened it to find Officer Sarah Jennings, our town's deputy sheriff, her uniform caked with snow. "Jim," she said, her voice tight with worry, "we've got a situation. The whole town's dark and we can't reach anyone outside. The radio at the station is dead too." My stomach dropped. "What about the emergency generators at the hospital?" The fire station? Sarah shook her head. Nothing. It's like everything just stopped. I grabbed my coat. Let's go. We need to check on people. As we stepped out into the storm, the wind nearly knocked us off our feet. The snow was so thick, I could barely see Sarah just a few feet in front of me. We made our way down Main Street, checking buildings and houses. Most people were okay, if scared and cold. But as we went, we started hearing stories. Mrs. Abernathy, the librarian, swore she saw something moving in her backyard, something too big to be a person or any animal native to these parts. The Johnsons said they heard voices whispering outside their windows, but when they looked, there was no one there. And then there was little Timmy Stevens. We found him hiding in his closet, shaking like a leaf. His parents were frantic. There was a man, Timmy kept saying. A tall man outside my window, but he wasn't a man. His face wasn't right. I tried to reassure them, to say it was just the storm playing tricks, but deep down, I remembered what I'd seen outside the newspaper office. As the night wore on, more reports came in. Strange figures seen in the blizzard, unexplained noises, people going missing. Sarah and I set up a command center in the town hall, using the last of the emergency generators to provide some light and heat. People started trickling in, seeking warmth and safety in numbers. That's when the real trouble started. It was around midnight when Tom Baker burst in, wild-eyed and panting. Tom was a level-headed guy, not prone to hysteria, but what he told us chilled me to the bone. They took Jenny, he gasped. Those things, I saw them. They weren't human, Jim. They took my little girl. The room erupted into panic. Sarah tried to calm everyone down, but I could see the fear in her eyes too. We need to organize search parties, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. We can't leave anyone out there. But as we prepared to head out, the generator sputtered and died. We were plunged into darkness. In the confusion that followed, I heard the doors burst open. Cold wind and snow whipped into the room along with something else. I couldn't see it clearly in the darkness, but I felt it. A presence, ancient and alien. Screams erupted around me. I felt people pushing, shoving, trying to get away from whatever had entered. In the chaos, I found myself separated from the others. I stumbled through the dark halls of the town hall, my heart pounding in my ears. I could hear things moving around me, whispers in a language I couldn't understand. I don't know how long I wandered in the dark. Time seemed to lose all meaning. But eventually I found myself back outside, in the heart of the storm. The wind had died down, but the snow was still falling heavily. In the eerie stillness I saw them, dark figures moving through the snow, tall, impossibly thin, with limbs that bent at odd angles. They moved with a grace that defied the laws of physics, gliding over the snow as if it wasn't there. And their faces, God, their faces. Where there should have been features, there was only a smooth, reflective surface like black ice. I could see my own terrified expression mirrored back at me. I stood frozen, unable to move, unable to scream. One of the figures turned towards me, cocking its head in a disturbingly human gesture. It began to approach. That's when I heard it, a loud, blaring horn cutting through the silence. Headlights appeared in the distance, growing brighter. The figures turned towards the sound, then began to retreat. Within seconds, they had vanished into the swirling snow. A large snowplow rounded the corner, followed by several trucks. I recognized the logo on the side. They were from the next town over. As they pulled up, people began pouring out of buildings. I saw Sarah, Tom, and many others I'd feared were lost. There were tears, hugs, cries of relief. The driver of the lead truck approached me. "We got your distress call," he said. "Took us hours to get through the storm. What happened here?" I opened my mouth, then closed it again. How could I explain what I'd seen? What we'd all experienced? "The storm," I said finally. "It was bad. We lost power, communications. People got scared." The driver nodded sympathetically, clearly not understanding the full weight of what had happened. How could he? As dawn broke and the storm finally began to subside, we started to take stock. Miraculously, everyone was accounted for. Even Jenny, Tom's daughter, was found safe, with no memory of what had happened to her. In the days that followed, as power was restored and life began to return to normal, people started to rationalize what had happened. It was just the storm, they said. The cold, the dark, the isolation. It had made us see things that weren't there. But I knew better. We all did, deep down. Something had come to Millbrook that night. Something not of this world. I wrote the story for the paper, of course, a straightforward account of a severe blizzard and a town-wide blackout. That's what people needed to hear, to help them move on. But late at night, when the wind picks up and the shadows grow long, I remember. I remember the impossible grace of those figures in the snow, the whispers in an unknown tongue, the faces like black ice, reflecting our own terror back at us. And I wonder if they'll come back, if next time we'll be so lucky. Because now we know the truth that hides behind the veil of civilization. When the lights go out, when we're cut off from the world, that's when they come. The things that live in the spaces between, in the howling wind and driving snow. They're out there, waiting, and Millbrook will never truly sleep soundly again. As I sit here typing out this true account of what happened, I can't help but glance out the window. The weather report says another storm is coming, a big one. I pray it's just a normal blizzard, but as the first snowflakes begin to fall, I can't shake the feeling that something is watching, waiting. And I wonder, dear reader, as you sit there in your warm, well-lit home, how sure are you that you're truly alone? When the lights flicker, when the wind howls outside your window, what will you see in the darkness? Because now we know. When the blizzard comes, when the blackout hits, that's when they appear. And who knows? Maybe next time it won't be Millbrook. Maybe next time it will be your town. So the next time the lights go out, remember our story. And whatever you do, don't look outside, because something might be looking back.